Okay, well, hello everybody. I hope everybody's having a great day. Right now it's Wednesday, about 10:35. We're going to have an interesting two-part video. Last week, job placement was the lecture on campus for a class, and I made a 2-hour video for that. So I just want to kind of cover some of the bases in this briefer video, and then the other video I'm going to upload is almost 2 hours, so you'll have a little bit extra. But a couple things. I'm going to be emailing you. This is an actual real rehabilitation report. This is a rehabilitation plan, and this is a job analysis. So I'm going to be sending you all three of these documents. These are it's proprietary, so it's my personal things. I'm sharing them with you because, this is an educational experience. But you might want to print these out after you watch this brief little video because you'll need them for the next very long video that I'm going to put up. Now, for me as a rehabilitation counselor, job placement is where the rubber meets the road. I can do all these wonderful things. I can send them for medical eval, psychological eval, do my assessment, get them trained, send them to college, whatever. But if I do not enable them to return to hopefully full-time gainful employment, which is competitive employment, and many of you that work in the state agencies, you know how important that is nowadays, then the case was a failure, no matter how happy the person was. Over the last 20 years, competitive employment has been getting more and more important in the federal VR program, state federal VR program. In private rehab, it's always been the critical, most important thing. And not just competitive employment, but how much do you make? That is a difference between private and public. In public, your clients get jobs, you're pretty happy. In my role as a private rehabilitation counselor, if the person was making 100 grand and I get them a job for 50 grand, well, that's not good enough. That's a problem. Now, in the private sector, another difference is we are focused on getting people back to work ASAP, hopefully trying to get them back to the same job or same employer or modified job in the same employer, and so on. Now, in the textbook, we talk about supply and demand side placement roles. I kind of like to have a hybrid where I consider both things, the client's perspective, but also the employer's perspective. Now, with WIO, the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, that's like a really hot thing for state VR people. So you all that are in the state system, you probably know about it because you're getting trained and emails about it all the time. But for supply side, we're kind of trying to find like Goldilocks, the thing that fits the client's personal abilities, interests, aptitudes, education, IQ, personality, if you want to go off even deeper, religion, sexual orientation, time schedules, who knows? I mean, there's all different kinds of things. So basically, this means competitive employment, applying for a job just like you or I would apply for. The client is the primary focus for this, and we're all going to take into account all their needs, their interests, their aptitudes, their strengths, their weaknesses, and so on. Now, Salamone in '96 divided the supply side into counselor-centered and client-centered placement. Again, I would really recommend a blending of the two, not just be totally client-centered or counselor-centered, but let's talk about these things for a minute. So counselor-centered placement, this is where, and again, I kind of disagree with the textbook a little bit. Even with client-centered, you're also going to use the job analysis, job development, job modifications, restructuring, marketing, maybe doing transitional employment, especially if you're working with the transition population, i.e. kids aging out of school and then hopefully making it into the world of work, in order to secure like competitive employment for the client. In this model, the counselor takes a more active role. Again, being from the private sector, I'm evaluated on how many of my clients get jobs, period. Doesn't matter what it takes to make it happen. That is how I'm evaluated and compensated. So I'm used to taking a more active role. I'm usually contacting my clients at least once a week, if not 2 or 3 times a week, setting up interviews, in the old days, I would take them actually out for interviews, completing the application, cover letters, the whole 9 yards, following up the employers, and all those kind of cool things. Now, client-centered placement's a little different, where we provide psychoeducational, skill building, support services, things that could be utilized like job clubs, job seeking skills training, and things of that nature. And the whole idea is to help the client develop the skills required so that they can get the job independently and do it on their own. Again, I think a blended model, because I prefer to be very, very active, but also teach a man or a woman how to fish, if you will, and have them doing a lot of independent job search on their own. The more work that the client does on their own, the easier it is for me. Now, I usually will say to the client, let's have this like a 50-50 relationship. If I'm doing all the work, this is not going to be successful, and so on. I don't want to say, well, if you're doing all the work, because then why am I being paid if I'm not doing anything? So in the client-centered, in theory, the person would come back less for return vocational rehabilitation or rehabilitation counseling services, because they would have the knowledge of how to get a job and they'd be off and running. Now, in the public sector, as we talked about many times, this just doesn't happen frequently, because once the person qualifies for services, they can just keep coming back and back and back and back. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing a 15-year longitudinal study right now with Maryland Doors. In the private sector, it's not the way. I mean, once we do one rehabilitation plan and we get you the job we're shooting for, I close my case and I never see them again, unless there's some other kind of injury. Demand side, this is really where we try to take the needs of the employer into account. We really kind of have two customers, the client and the employer, and it's like a balancing act to some degree. So on this model, on the demand side, we're not just working for the client, we're also working for the employer. This is kind of like the whole WIA idea of building relationships with employers, because the most effective job placement you can do is giving them someone that works out well for them, and then guess what? They call you for more people, because what we do is we would do the screening, we would do the testing, we would figure out who meets their needs and give that individual to them, or at least refer them for the job, and keep our fingers crossed and hopefully it works out. So we're kind of concentrating on what's best for the employer and how they fill the open employment opportunities with qualified, that's a key word, qualified applicants. Really, the bottom line is developing a long-term relationship with this employer, which you have to kind of be careful, because you don't want to burn that bridge. It's very hard to establish a trust or relationship with an employer, so I don't want to send my worst client there that's going to not show up for work, because guess what? That bridge is burned. So in a way, it's an ethical dilemma. We have to, in a way, figure out who's going to meet the employer's needs best and try to satisfy that need. Now, our knowledge of the world of work, this just comes with time. There's no way you're going to learn it in a book. I can expose you to some basics like the ONET and the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of Labor data and things like that. But without your clinical knowledge, going out there, seeing the jobs in your own two eyes, doing a job analysis, working with the doctors to modify the job so it fits the client's capacity, that just comes with time. I mean, I've done thousands of job analysis, and over time I build a body of knowledge of, okay, what do these kind of occupations take? How much lifting, twisting, bending, pushing, pulling, turning, and so on. I just think it's very critical, important knowledge. It's kind of like, what's the side effects of some medications, or what surgeries are more effective than others? How do you know that? You're not going to medical school, The way you learn is by clinical experience with clients and learning what happens, what works, what doesn't work, what can we try to do best next time. So this knowledge is critical in my opinion, and it takes time to build up. There's just no way, no shortcuts. When you complete a job analysis or do research for one client, that data should stay in your brain so you can utilize it for another client down the road. Visiting work sites, I don't know how much you guys are doing this or will do it in the future, but this is really twofold. Number one, you get the data from seeing it with your own eyes and ears and modifying it, but then you might meet the hiring boss or the manager, and the next time you see, oh wow, they're hiring somebody, call up Johnny and say, hey, I got someone that's perfect for you. Can I come down? How about Tuesday at 2, or how about Thursday at 1, which is better for you? Kind of paint them in a corner so it's not yes or no, it's when am I coming? So tailoring placement services. Some clients need more services than others. I mean, it could be a function of the diagnosis. It could be a function of pre-existing psychological or psychiatric issues. It could be an interaction of both of those plus the person's personality, and on and on and on. People generally with psychiatric disabilities have the poorest outcomes. They have the lowest job retention rates, usually make the lower wages if we're going to just break it into categories: physical disability, um, cognitive, mental, emotional, or psychiatric. Usually the latter is the one that's getting the short end of the stick. Because for lots of reasons, if the person's feeling great, they stop taking the medicine, and then things blow up, and then they don't go to work, and then that job is over, and they're back for more services. Students making the transition from the world of school to the world of work can be challenging. Maybe mom and dad is involved too much. Maybe they've never had a job in their life. So this might really require a customized, tailored job placement strategy just for that specific individual. Unfortunately, the placement rates for people in transition are just low for all kinds of reasons, but you just try to do the best you can. Now, dealing with employer concerns. Many times employers might feel, oh, if I take this person under, he's not going to show up for work, they're going to raise my insurance rates, they're going to lower morale, they're going to lower productivity, and on and on and on. Most of those are total myths. We can talk to them and present facts and studies and things till we're blue in the face, and most of the time it's one ear out the other. How do we challenge that prejudice? Proving them wrong. So if we have our person coming in to work for them and they turn into the model employee, they're never late for work, they're early, they do a good job, the person's not going to admit, wow, I kind of was prejudiced against people with disabilities. Guess what? When they call you on the phone and say, hey, I do have someone else, you've kind of knocked down that discrimination or prejudice. Second injury laws, this is a little bit more complicated, where say the person's been a carpenter for 40 years and he's had 5 different surgeries over 40 years, and then this last time he fell off the roof or something. What second injury laws are in a nutshell is all the other injuries and disability ratings and treatment and stuff that this person, the baggage that they bring with them, will be not all on this latest accident. That's what a second injury fund is that they're just going to be responsible for this broken arm, not 3 back surgeries from 10, 20, and 30 years ago. Now, productivity concerns, I would recommend going to the Job Accommodation Network. Again, this is run out of West Virginia University. Great website, gives you great suggestions for accommodations. You type in the diagnosis, and it will start giving you suggestions. People with disabilities, they have low turnover rates. Usually after going through a long process like this, they want that job. They want to keep that job. And then again, there is prejudice in the real world against people with mental, emotional, and those type of disabilities. Now, briefly, the law. We have some laws on our side. Section 501 basically mandates that federal agencies take affirmative action to hire people with disabilities for qualified candidates. And what this comes down to is if you're getting a government contract over $10,000, which basically every contract probably is, then 501 would be a protection for people with disabilities if they are qualified. The ADA is another significant piece of legislation that kind of levels the playing field. Think of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It kind of was patterned on that to some degree, where now instead of race being the variable, disability is the variable that we're going to try to protect individuals about. There's targeted job tax credits where you can go into the interview saying, hey, okay, you hired Johnny for $30,000. Guess what? The first $15,000, you're going to get a tax credit, so your tax bite is lower. So you need to talk to the businesses in economic language that they understand, and it's not them being a good Samaritan. It's in their economic best interest to give Johnny or Jane a shot. And those tax things change all the time. You think about it. Taxes are super complicated. Every year the laws change. That's a whole industry into itself. Now, preparing the client for interviews. This is really important because we don't want to just show up cold. I would like to do role playing, let them know what to expect. If I'm not bringing them, where to show up, what time to be there, what to wear. I would try to have them do cognitive behavioral approach, do homework on the agency you're going to or the employer you're going to, maybe even on the interview person. For some clients, that's going to be asking too much, but do what you can. Role playing is very effective. Why do you want this job? How come you haven't worked in 5 years? They might be like, but if I give them the answers, hopefully in the interview they can regurgitate those answers. The interview is critical. Usually within the first couple minutes, the employer knows. Some studies show 2 minutes, some say 4 minutes, but the bottom line is after a few minutes of them meeting your client or you, they're going to know if they're going to hire you for the job or not. So the bottom line is we need to help people get jobs, and not just jobs, careers, so that they can go off, get a house with a white picket fence and live happy ever after. Then they don't need me. That's how I like to do job placement and rehabilitation counseling. We got the demand supply, the supply side of the focus on employing. So, it's just going to depend on what fits you and your personality and what kind of clients you're working with or consumers. Again, I prefer a hybrid or custom-made approach, really. And the knowledge that you will get from going out and seeing work sites is totally invaluable. You just can't get that from a book. So let's stay on track with everything that's going on. Again, there's going to be a second video that I'm going to be posting up later today, along with the 3 documents. Job analysis, take a look at it. This is a private rehabilitation plan. And this is a real report. So I go through these in much greater detail in the 2 hours that I'm going to put up for you. So let's just do this. If you have any questions after looking at the other video and looking at these documents, please let me know. Just keep up the good work. We've been catching up on grading as fast as we can. If you need anything or have any questions, please let us know. Jenny and I are here to help. So without any further ado, have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.